Recently watched an episode by Ancient Architects on scientifically dating the Giza pyramids, and all their episodes are really good. Whether I agree with them or not, I love the channel. But this particular episode, I felt compelled to do kind of a response on it because there's a few things I don't agree with, and I just like to put my views out there. I'm going to include some clips, and then I'm going to respond, giving you my perspective on what they have just said.
Their age is not debated by scholars, yet it remains a subject that has long been challenged by many independent researchers.
Well, I've got to say I agree with him on this particular point. The scholars are in agreement regarding the dates. They believe the pyramids were built, but there are independent researchers who disagree. And then there are people like me. I can't claim to be an independent researcher because, well, I'm not a researcher, really. I'm just some crazy woman who believes that she's dreamed about living in Egypt in a past life. But the research I do is based on the things that I've seen in my dream regressions. And so far, it's looking pretty good that I'm not as bonkers as some of you might think I am. So now I've disclosed where I'm coming from on this particular topic, we can get on with the matters at hand, which is discussing the evidence that ancient architects are brought to the table, and my perspective can explain why some of the evidence is the way that it is. So let's get into looking at this evidence, shall we?
And in 1935, Khufu's cartouche was found on the back of a casing stone.
If you are at all familiar with my channel, you will know that I speak of the casing stones being put in place by the dynastic Egyptians. They were cut, transported, shaped, and placed on the pyramid by the dynastic Egyptians, and that is no small feat. So, of course, they would have the cartouche of the pharaoh that organized that, the one that wanted to impress the gods by rebuilding this ancient structure.
His cartouche and variants of it was scrawled a number of times in the relieving chambers above the king's chamber.
This is no surprise because they had access to the inside of this amazing building, and they searched it very thoroughly, and of course they'd write things like that on places like graffiti.
And we also find it inscribed on stone slabs associated with the ancient causeway to the east of the pyramid.
Once again, it's only to be expected. They built the causeway, so yes, of course they would write things on the causeway.
Panels showing the king's image have also been found.
Okay, yep, panels have been found. That's good.
And of course, the pyramid is surrounded by mastabas belonging to Khufu's family and closest advisors.
From my perspective, these are all new buildings built by Khufu because they had all this available resource from the ruins that was available to them on the Giza Plateau, from all the buildings, from what had fallen off the pyramids. They just had this enormous amount of stone. And so, of course, they're going to reuse it and put structures in place that are meaningful to them so that they can all enjoy the grace of the gods, the rewards that the gods are going to give them for having done all this work on these beautiful sites, which have such antiquity.
The 4th dynasty papyrus, known as the Diary of Mera, talks of transporting large amounts of Chura limestone to Akhet Khufu. This was the ancient name of the Great Pyramid.
So this is exactly what I have been talking about, that the dynastic Egyptians covered an existing building in Chura limestone. It was an enormous amount of work, and you do expect to see records of that having been done. I understand there are no records for the rest of the structure, but what we have here is completely consistent at this point with what I have been talking about, with regards to what aspects were done by the dynastic Egyptians and what aspects of the buildings they actually found already in place.
The problem, though, is that people will still say that this evidence is circumstantial. Yes, it shows the three kings were associated with the three pyramids, but according to some, it's not evidence they built them, just that they reused them.
Well, I couldn't have worded that any better.
Therefore, we can't just look at the archaeological evidence alone. We should also take into account written historical sources. And what do we have? Well, Pharaoh Amenhotep II of the 18th dynasty attributed the monuments of Giza to Khufu and Khafre. This is written on a stele in his New Kingdom Sphinx temple.
So let's have a closer look at what it said. So he obviously was out with his horse, or horses, and he stopped to check out the Sphinx. Then it says that he spent some time walking around it, looking at the beauty of the sanctuary of Khufu and Khafre, the revered. So clearly he never forgot this experience, because it said he put it in his heart and he wanted to keep their names alive. It does not say that he thought that Khufu or Khafre built it, but what he did believe, obviously, was that they aligned themselves very favourably with the gods. And he clearly wanted to do the same thing by essentially building his own sanctuary and putting up his own stele, and probably doing a fair bit of restoration in order to get the favour of the gods. So while we're on the subject of stele, let's discuss the rather controversial inventory stele.
The inventory stele, which is dated to the 26th dynasty, attributes the Great Pyramid to Khufu.
Now here's where it gets really interesting, because the archaeologists claim that it's a fake, well, an ancient Egyptian fake, probably dated to around the 26th dynasty, so that's about 600 BC. And they say the reason that the Egyptians faked it was to make the Temple of Isis seem more important. Couldn't it just be that they replicated what they found in disrepair and maybe used their own language or jargon so that it was more understandable to the people of their era? Anyway, what does it actually say? Well, the stela presents a list of 22 divine statues owned by the Temple of Isis, and it goes on to claim that the temple existed since before the time of Khufu. But wait, there's even more interesting stuff. The text also says he found the house of Isis, mistress of the pyramid, by the side of the hollow of the Sphinx. Right, so he found the house of Isis. I assume this is one of the megalithic temples in front of the Sphinx. And he built his pyramid and a pyramid for his daughter beside the temple of the goddess Isis. So there's the house of Isis and the temple of Isis. This temple of Isis sounds like one of the great pyramids to me, and his pyramid and his daughter's pyramid are both satellite pyramids built by him from the ruins of what were on the plateau. But hey, that's just the way it sounds to me. It goes on to say, he restored the Sphinx, all covered in paint, of the guardian of the atmosphere, who guides the winds with his gaze. He replaced the back part of the Nemes headdress, which was missing, with gilded stone. The figure of this god, cut in stone, is solid and will last to eternity, keeping its face always looking towards the east. Furthermore, it states that lightning struck the back of that headdress on the Sphinx, and it badly damaged it. As I mentioned, it clearly states that the Sphinx was already in its place long before Pharaoh Khufu came to power, but it also hints that Khufu built his temple in the vicinity of the house of the Sphinx and built his pyramid and his daughter's pyramid next to the house of Isis, which, as I said, I believe is one of the Great Pyramids, and that he restored the pyramid in order to gain favor with the gods. And his pyramid was hence in the presence of that structure in order to help him with the afterlife. Ah, the things that the ancient Egyptians would do to get into the good books of the gods. But this isn't the only indication of ancient Egyptians doing restoration work. It's actually quite a common theme. There's a very clear record of regular restoration on older sites. And check my episodes on Khayyam Waset as an example, because that's really interesting. But even more relevant is an example from Thutmose IV. So this guy was restoring the Sphinx during the Old Kingdom, and that's within 1,000 years of its so-called creation. Here's what it says in some of the ancient texts about what happened. So Thutmose IV apparently went on some kind of journey that ended up near the Sphinx, and he dreamt that the Sphinx asked him to clear the sand surrounding its body. And in return, the Sphinx was willing to make him the king of Egypt if he restored the statue. So Thutmose cleared the sand, he did some restoration, and he built a wall to protect the Sphinx going forward. And the rest is history. Literally history. Recently, they even found the wall that the story speaks of, that Thutmose actually built. So let's get back to ancient architects.
Furthermore, Prince Kenwazet of the 19th dynasty, son of Ramesses the Great, wrote about King Menkaure on the granite casing stones of the Third Pyramid.
Oh, I agree. This guy is so interesting. Look him up if you're interested, because you will be surprised how fascinating this subject actually is.
And the same period wooden coffin that was found inside the Third Pyramid mentions Menkaure by name.
Okay.
Two methods are being used to date the pyramids of Giza. These are surface luminescence dating and radiocarbon dating.
Radiocarbon dating is useful when there's organic material that they're very sure is from the same period as the stonework. And surface luminescence dating is useful when they are sure that the stone has been exposed to the outer world, so to speak, so that it hasn't been hidden away.
This scientific analysis was carried out on the Menkaure Pyramid granite casing stones. I don't think anybody doubts that this stonework is original, and so surface luminescence testing should give us an indication for the pyramid's construction date. Here we can see the exact place the granite sample was obtained, on the eastern side of the pyramid, where we find a flattened part of the casing stones. The date obtained was 3450 BC, plus or minus 950 years.
Why, oh why, did they have to date the flattened part? The flattened part is the part that the dynastic Egyptians flattened. They needed to date the rounded bits. Oh well, at least we know the exact date when the dynastic Egyptians flattened that part of the pyramid.
And the results tell us the Menkaure Pyramid was built between 4400 BC and 2500 BC.
Surely it just means that the dynastic Egyptians were working on it in that particular area on the pyramid during that time.
So now we look to radiocarbon dating. Mortar binds each structure together. It's found in abundance throughout each of the pyramid's core masonry, and anyone that's analysed the pyramids will tell you it's not part of a repair job.
I'm not sure how I could debate this particular point without finding out exactly where the mortar was located that they did the testing on. Because if they were finding it between blocks that were located within the pyramid in inaccessible areas, then yeah, I have no answer for that. But if it was on the outside of the pyramid, what would have been on the casing stones, between the casing stones, or even between the casing stones and the rough-hewn blocks, then that's a whole different ballgame.
Regarding the Giza pyramids, the first radiocarbon tests were funded by the Edgar Cayce Foundation in 1984. The dates average some 374 years older than the historical dates of the 4th Dynasty kings. So, a second round of testing took place in 1995. As we can see, once again the results for the pyramids did not line up with the 4th Dynasty timeline, with the organic matter for the Giza pyramids being 200 to 500 years too old.
So what this is telling me is that the dates are a bit off for when the dynastic Egyptians found the site and started working on the site, doing the restoration, building their own buildings, and basically making the area their own.
My interpretation for the age of the pyramids, from looking at all of the available information and data, is yes, in my opinion, the 3 Giza pyramids were built by Khufu, Khafre and Menkaure in the 4th Dynasty of the Old Kingdom, but I do think it's possible the timeline of the Old Kingdom may need refining.
So with all this evidence, the only bit of evidence that gives me a few doubts is the dating of the mortar, and I really need to know more about where it came from before I can comment on that. But overall, it doesn't change my perspective at all. And if anything, it looks to me like it's evidence for the things that I've been saying rather than evidence against it.